I would like to introduce our guest today. Dr. Eyal Fruchter is the director of the Division of Mental Health at the Rambam Healthcare Campus in Haifa, Israel. Dr. Fruchter served in many leading positions in the field of mental health in the Israeli Defense Force. In his last position, he headed the mental health department of the Israeli Army Medical Corps. During his military service, Dr. Fruchter also earned an MHA from Ben Gurion University of the Negev. Dr. Fruchter is a leading clinician and researcher in the fields of suicide prevention and PTSD. He participates in conferences and collaborative research with many professionals in the US and in Europe. And I believe that will be all from me. I would like to give the floor to our guest. We have an hour and a half for a meeting today. If you have questions, you can write them in the chat. And later on, your questions will be answered. Anya Mishevska will be the moderator, so you can write either to her or you can write your questions directly in the chat, and they will be passed to our guest. Dr. Fruchter, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I'm privileged. And I'm very happy to see a lot of people joining us. I would try and give you some of my experience in PTSD treatment, and especially in special areas or special times like you have today, in order to make you more suitable and to give you some tools that you would be able to use while taking care of the refugees that have suffered tremendous horrors. And we hear the stories, and it's terrible. So I will share now my screen and add the slideshow. So I will talk about, as said, I will talk about war-related trauma and PTSD, and I will try and give you some of our experience that we have gained during a lot of activities, either military activities or civilian refugees or civilian military activities, about the prevention and treatment, and I will try and help you to know a little bit more, to gain from our experience, so you would be able to use it. So why Israel? First of all, Israel is, of course, a country that has a lot of borders with countries, Arab countries, that don't actually like our staying here. And we have had a lot of wars in the last few decades, and we are currently in a struggle also. And every now and then some missiles are flying and falling in the areas of Gaza and coming from Lebanon. And so we should all the time be prepared. I myself, as said, I have been in the military for many years, and I have gained some of my experience also while I was residenting in psychiatry in Ha'emek Hospital, and during the period that we had a lot of terrorist attacks, bombers. Unfortunately, we sometimes still have them. We had one yesterday in Tel Aviv. So I had my time to think, what should we do and how can we take care of the people when they need us, when they come immediately after the trauma. And this is the time that is so relevant to you. So I will try and remind you a little bit about what is PTSD. Of course, all of you are professionals and you know all the items there, but I would still remind you a little. So we'll be on the same page, and then we'll talk about the 3 different levels of prevention a little bit. And then we will focus on the secondary prevention, and we will talk about 3 different methods for different times. The SHIELD protocol, which was invented in the IDF and is now well recognized in many militaries and many areas of wars in the United States, in Romania, in Poland, in Germany, and other countries. I will talk a little bit about the basic pH, which some of you might know because it comes from Lazarus, one of the big behavior therapy builders. And I will try and show you also how to do a group modified debriefing, which is extremely important in times like that, and especially when you have a lot of patients or a lot of refugees around you and you can't do the one-on-one talk, or you want to gain from the group in order to build a stronger group. So I will talk a little bit from my experience and what is the modified debriefing and how it should be done.
Eyal, sorry to
Sure.
interrupt you. Can you make a full screen of your presentation, and we still can see the first slide. I don't know if you moved to the
Oh, I
second
moved
already.
it, yes.
Yeah,
So
so
I'll
can
stop
you?
sharing. I will stop
Okay.
sharing, and I will try and do that first. Okay, so that's the second slide.
Okay, now we can see the second slide. Thank you.
Okay, so does it move? Wait, we'll see if it moves. Yeah, it did. Okay, it did for you too. Okay, that's great.
Yes.
So, and last but not least, I will try and take the last 5 minutes of our talk about you, because from our experience and from a lot of articles that were published about it, those who take care of the refugees or those who take care of the post-traumatic patients, they often suffer from secondary traumatization, and we should always be aware of that and know how to take care of ourselves and our colleagues in order to enable them to keep on doing the good work that you do and to support the refugees, and yet not to develop compassion fatigue or secondary traumatization, PTSD. So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, in order to go into PTSD, I wanted to remind you, I know that you are all aware of that, but I want you to focus on the soldier in the middle. During the World War I, of course, nobody talked about PTSD. They all talked about shell shock. No country wanted to admit that we have a disease caused by war. And shell shock, you know, it's not the responsibility of the government, so it's okay. But I want you to take a good look at the soldier in the middle. He is the typical acute stress reaction patient. And I know that you all meet with refugees, so probably they would all look somewhat like that. In World War II and in Korea, it was still not decided that it is a disease, and everybody called it combat exhaustion and combat fatigue. And again, I want you to look at the soldier carrying the missile. He is functioning, but from his gaze, you can see that he doesn't really want to be there. He doesn't know what's going on, and he's more or less focused in himself and overwhelmed by what's happening around him. Only during the Vietnam War, people started talking about PTSD, and actually the American country, they wouldn't like it to be called a disease. They wanted to call it post-Vietnam syndrome, but the public didn't allow them. And there was a big riot there. And then PTSD was identified for the first time as a disorder, which means that the country should compensate for that. And then 1980 is the first time that PTSD got into the DSM books and has not left it since. So we have now the clarification of what is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's a very easy to understand illness. And the DSM-5 recognizes the PTSD when we have a trauma, a big traumatic event that endangered your life or your well-being or your mental health, but you should be participating it in person, or if not in person, as a secondary traumatization. So if you took care of a patient with PTSD, that's the only two traumas that got into the classification. If you had the trauma, so you saw somebody dead and you were shot and missed, and luckily for you, or you had to be a refugee and you had to leave your home, otherwise you would be dead. And a lot of the people that you meet suffered from that. These people should they should show 4 groups of symptoms. Avoidance, trying to avoid everything that reminds them of what happened. Intrusion, so things, memories or dreams or thoughts about the trauma or flashbacks, they all come back often and you can't get rid of them. Then we have a negative deterioration, a negative influence on cognition and affect. So these people won't sleep well and won't concentrate well and won't be very happy. They would be very sad and depressed, and they wouldn't be able to talk a lot, and they want to stop being with their friends or the families. And last but not least, they're hyper aroused. So every noise will make them jump. Every time they talk to you, they would screen all the surroundings because they are looking for trouble and they know the trouble would come. So they're very frightened and they're very on the edge. So that's PTSD. That's all. Trauma, intrusion, avoidance, negative influence on cognition and affect, and hyperarousal. But trauma as a whole, and when we talk about trauma, everybody should remember it always, we are talking about a balanced scale. So it's not, trauma for me is not the same for Marta or for Anna. It's different. The trauma is actually, it depends on what are the demands, what is demanded from me, what is expected from me. And on the other hand, it is what things do I put in? If I have experience in treating with trauma, in dealing with trauma, I probably am in a better mood. Or if I have a good social net and people are around me and they care for me, then I'm in a much better position. We also know that when I am hungry or tired, extremely tired, or cold or wet, then my balance scale is not balanced to start with. So a more minor trauma would cause a trauma. Okay. Now, it is interesting because we are used to think of trauma as something that is globally accepted, but it's not. So when I'm in a good mood and I have my friends not far away and I'm well fed and I'm not tired and I'm in a good well-being and I know that people would help me, then I'm in a much stronger position and I would suffer much harder traumas before I lose the balance, before I develop a post-traumatic stress disorder. It is not like that when we are dealing with refugees, because most of the refugees come to us after losing their homes or after losing a lot of things and with a lot of unexpectedness. Okay, so they don't know where they're going to, they don't know how to manage, they don't have the finance for that, they don't have sometimes the language for that, they don't know who is around them and who would help them. And that is a very delicate position. So when we are like that, we are not balanced to start with. And if we had a minor trauma, that should be enough in order to make all the scale fall down and to develop something out of the trauma. Now, what are the outcomes of the trauma? We are used to talk about outcomes of trauma and talk all the time about PTSD, right? PTSD, everybody knows and everybody likes, and it's well understood. But it's not the only outcome of trauma. Actually, trauma can cause much more than that. A lot of people that suffers trauma today, their immune system would be jeopardized and they would, or they might develop cancer in a few years. So that is because the immune system all the time looks for cancerous cells that are different from the normal cells. And they just finish them up. But when the immune system does not work well, then we are in a much harder position, and we have a higher chance to develop later on cancer and other diseases too, like autoimmune disorders, um, like blood pressure and other physical aspects. So trauma can cause a lot of problems, not only in the PTSD field. In the mental field, it can cause everything. It can cause a psychotic event. It can cause a major depression disorder, and it can cause all the anxiety spectrum. So usually when we are talking about trauma, we think PTSD, but no, hey, we have a lot of work coming and a lot of disorders coming, and it's not only PTSD. Also on the social side, we can see that trauma can cause a lot of suicides. We see that from the Americans very clearly when they came back now from from Iraq and Afghanistan. But before the war started, before their time there started, they had about 4 suicides for veterans and soldiers per day. And since their involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq started, it's already the 12th year now, they have suicide for veteran or soldier every hour. They have 22 per day. And that's a terrible thing. And that's how we can know that PTSD causes a lot of suicides, also a lot of homicides and domestic violence, drug and alcohol abuse. So if we understand that when we talk about trauma, we're not talking only about PTSD, then we can move on and understand the sequence of PTSD. You will meet all of them, so it is important. Some of you are coming and working currently in Kiev, so my heart is deeply with you, and you would probably meet a lot of people in the ASR state. What is the ASR? It's acute stress reaction, and it's up to 48 hours after the trauma. So a missile now fell, or somebody was shot near me on the street, and the next 48 hours, I could be suffering from acute stress reaction. Actually, whenever we see something happen, a terrorist attack or a war attack happening on civilian society, we would have out of 10 victims, 7 would be mental victims. So 7 would suffer from acute stress reaction, and only 3 would have physical aspects like severely wounded or killed. These are the numbers all over the world from a lot of experience. So it is not a surprise for us that a lot of refugees and a lot of victims suffer from mental issues, especially at the sequence of PTSD. So we have 48 hours ASR, and this is a reaction. It's not a disorder. We will talk about that a little bit later, but it means that we don't need a professional to take care of the people at that time. We need somebody else to take care of them. A lot of people can, and the best people that would take care of their friends during these 48 hours would be their social net. Okay, their friends, their team unit, friends, buddies, or their classmates, or if they're students, their year mates. These are the best people to take care of them at that time, as long as they know what to do. I will talk about that a little bit further. Now, after 48 hours, it's if the symptoms still exist, they already look a little bit like PTSD. And they have to share the same symptoms and only more intense. And this lasts from the 48 hours from the trauma, after the trauma, to a month after the trauma. Now, from a month on, we have PTSD, and you have acute PTSD for 3 months, chronic PTSD from 3 months on. And actually what we found out, and all around the world we found out, PTSD can fade out alone. We don't necessarily need to take care of everybody, but if the symptoms are severe, we might want to do that because they're probably not going to be on the good third, especially when you are a refugee and you don't have any base to balance your scales on. Now, what changes from normal recovery from a trauma to an unnormal and sometimes a post-traumatic memory of the trauma? So normal recovery, it goes like that. I have been now in an occasion, okay, in a fighting zone, look at the tanks, some gray cloud is coming from one of them. That's a traumatic event. We don't know what happened, but it's okay, it's a trauma. Now, if we look for normal recovery, it means that the amygdala part in the brain, in the midbrain, in the limbic area, can concentrate in all the details, remember all the details, and process them. And in order to process them, she needs a lot of clarity of what happened. All the details should be understood. And then the memory would still be bad. I mean, it's a bad memory, okay? But it would slowly and gradually move in the brain to its right spot, and we can remember a lot of good things that happened to us, like we got married, or we've been in a vacation in the beach, or we graduated, or we have a dog or a baby, whichever is nicer. And then the bad memory is still there, but it's not overshadowing the whole memory. When we are talking about the memory of developing the PTSD, we are talking of something else. It starts the same, but gradually the picture gets stuck. And as you see, it's getting more cloudy, it's less clear, not all the details are understood, and sometimes it's extremely frightening, but it does not move from the main area of the memory, and it gets stuck in the amygdala and you can't move it, and then you're stuck with PTSD. Okay, so if we understand that, we would probably use a lot of details from that in the near future when we talk about how to deal with that. Now, when we meet the people, we should understand what are the relevant risk factors. Now, there are some risk factors from the event, the actual event, and there are risk factors from after the event that are relevant for us when we talk about later developing PTSD or not. The intensity of the event is very important. If a lot of people got killed or got wounded, or a lot of, I don't know, my house, my home was ruined, then it's a very intense event for me. And of course, it is the risk is very high. Man-made traumas are much more dangerous to developing future PTSD than activities that are not man-made. And it is important for us to make sure how was the memory consolidation at the trauma. If I manage to remember all the details, I'm in a much better position and in a much lower risk to develop PTSD. So when I talk to somebody that was traumatized, I don't know, a woman that was raped by the soldiers and ran away and now is a refugee, somebody that ran and the convoy was bombed and you've seen several people dead or wounded, maybe a friend of his. If he can talk about what happened and tell you all the details of what happened, he has a good consolidation of memory and he would probably not develop later on PTSD. Whereas those people who remember but don't remember all the details, they skip and they jump and they are not able to understand exactly what happened because they were dissociation during the trauma, or because their memory dropped and they couldn't process and consolidate it, then they are in a higher risk. People that suffer from guilt, anger, or shame are also in a higher risk to develop PTSD, as well as early sleep disturbances. Now, sleep is important because that's the place where we consolidate the memories. So it is extremely important for us to sleep well. And if we have a very long sleep disturbance since the trauma, we are in a higher risk to develop later on PTSD. When I feel helpless and that I don't have a social net that would help me, and I'm very anxious all the time, and I feel very under threat, that's not a good sign also. Now, if you are still in the fighting zone, that's perfectly understood. But if we're talking about refugees that are in the outer district of the area, then people should get over it. And if they don't, that's a higher risk for PTSD. Now, after the trauma, we have also some relevant risk factors. For instance, a lack of social support. Social support is actually the single extremely important factor. Okay, if I look at all the factors, and I'll talk about several things, the social support is most important in the hours after the traumatic event and while getting away. And of course, some of you are the providers of the social support, so you should know that your role is extremely important. If we have depression or if we are abusing alcohol or drug early in the procedure, on the way, that's very bad, and it means that I will probably develop PTSD later on, among other things, because it's not possible for me to cope alone and without all sort of drugs. And second, because it changes the structure of the sleep. And when the structure of the sleep is changed, then we cannot consolidate the memory and process it properly. So it would probably get stuck in the amygdala and we would not be able to move it. Guilt and early use of benzodiazepines does the same, and it does very badly for coping with the trauma and moves things into the risk factor, the risk to PTSD. Now, this is important. The benzodiazepine, especially in the first days, they should be avoided almost in all cost, because benzodiazepines, as alcohol and as with drugs, would not enable the people to process the memory and they will get stuck. So please, if you work with doctors and they give benzodiazepines to refugees that just came from the fights, please advise them differently and tell them to read the articles, because the articles about that has been published already in a lot of papers, and they would then remember that they know that it is not good to give benzodiazepines in the early aftermath of a trauma. So I want to tell you a little bit about myself. When I was, the year was 2003, and I was on a shift, a night shift, during my last period of the residency in psychiatry. And I came from the military. I was before that a brigade doctor and a battalion doctor, and I met with traumas, but nothing prepared me to that night of the shift when a terrorist bomber attack exploded in the mall near the hospital, in the shopping mall. Now, we understood that something happened, and we, of course, prepared the emergency room. But all of a sudden, a lot of people came and they were all traumatized. And as I said, out of 10 people with problems, 7 are mine. So I should take care of 7 of them because they had acute stress reaction. And I asked myself, what do you do with acute stress reaction? So they come, what do you do with them? And I don't know what you know, but what we had officially is only something that a guy, a very intelligent physician named Solomon, wrote when he was a physician, a psychiatrist in the First World War, joining the American troops. And what he said is that we must implement 3 important ideas: proximity, expectancy, and immediacy. What is proximity? To work as close as possible to the front lines. or to the area where the trauma happened. So we don't run away, we work there. Second is expectancy. So during the whole time, we would share the expectations from the soldier. He was working with soldiers to go back and play a role as a soldier, so not to become ill and not functioning. And last but not least is immediacy. So we should take care of things as soon as possible. So we might change the aftermath and not let them stuck with PTSD. But you know, he didn't say how to do it. So what we actually did is we asked people to come down. We gave them very sweet tea in order to raise their sugar level. And of course, we gave them some cookies to eat because we wanted the physiology to be good or to be better. So the balancing scale would be more balanced. And we asked them to talk about what happened, to tell us exactly what happened, and then to talk to their friends. And we also told them not to be frightened if they don't sleep the first days, or if they don't want to eat the first days, or if they don't manage to function the first days, because it is acute stress reaction and everything is okay. We also told them that if things are not okay a week or 3 days afterwards, then they should come, because in that we know how to treat. Because hey, when we have PTSD, we know how to treat it, right? And I was very frustrated by that, because it's not right. It's not right when people are coming now, immediately after the trauma, and we don't have anything good to do with them. We just tell them, wait, if you have an illness, then we'll take care of you. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I said I will talk about the 3 levels of prevention, so that's the time. We have 3 levels of prevention. Primary prevention is before meeting with the cause. Okay, for instance, in PTSD, I'm a kid in school, or I'm an adult, but I did not meet with a trauma. So that's the time to work with me on primary prevention, like resiliency, or like psychoeducation, to know why I should be where I am. Okay, so if I'm a Ukrainian soldier or a Ukrainian woman that is a refugee and her husband stayed, so she has a little bit of guilt at least, but he stayed because he needs to fight, of course, he's a reserve force. I can understand the logic behind that, and I can understand the morality behind it. And then that's a resilience in the primary resilience zone. After I met with a trauma, somebody died, somebody was hurt, somebody was mentally overwhelmed, somebody was raped. We have all of that. We still did not develop the PTSD, but we had the trauma. This is the secondary prevention area. This is the time to work for us. This is the best place to work in. It's like coming to the emergency room. You still don't have the mental illness, because it will take you a month to develop a full-blown PTSD, and it will take you several days to develop acute stress disorder, which is a disorder. But when it's only a reaction, that's a great point to work on. And a primary and secondary intervention, the secondary prevention, is after meeting with the cause, but before developing the illness. Tertiary prevention is when we have the PTSD. Now, of course, for PTSD, there are a lot of treatments. There are some drug medications that would work, like SSRIs, Prozac and their friends. And we have others, Zoloft, Lustral in Israel. We have other options, of course, as well. We all know that the best methods to treat PTSD is not medication. It is CBT, cognitive and behavioral methods, for instance, EMDR, or prolonged exposure, or CFAR-CBT, or TF-CBT, trauma-focused CBT. These are all very good methods, but that's for next month or 2 months from now. Now we are dealing with acute stress reaction and acute stress disorder. Refugees that suffer from that should be taken care of, and that's what we're trying to go here. So you are in the same position that I was in 2003, and after looking at what we have, I was very frustrated. I did not take good care of the people coming from the mall. I did what I could, but it's not enough. And in 2006, we had the second Lebanese war, and I was even more frustrated because I said, hey, we have now soldiers in far away from Israel, 4 kilometers from the border, from the Israeli border, and we don't know how we can take care of them when they have acute stress reaction. And that is frustrating. And then I got, as said before, I got to be in the position of the head of the mental health in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. So I summoned some meetings and I looked at the options that we had. And then this team, with the help of Dr. Moshe Farhi, built the SHIELD protocol, which I'm going to show you, which is very easy to do. It should be done by the social net of the wounded person or the affected person. But if not, hey, let it be done by you. So in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about this method. First, remember the soldier that sat on the mud and didn't care for anyone. And I told you to remember him because he's the guy that we're going to focus on. He is under acute stress reaction. He feels helpless on a functional breakdown. He's detached from the surrounding. He's all alone. He's sure that only he is suffering from this. And he has emotional overflow. Okay, so every noise will make him jump and every touch would make him freeze. He is very confused and he has low self-efficacy. He does not think very highly of himself. What we should do is to fight all of this. And we do that by establishing an initial contact, emphasizing commitment, emphasizing and working on the challenge and control, cognitive communication, and continuity. Now, it sounds very easy, right? But let me show you how it's done. Okay. So how do you establish a contact? The guy or the person, the victim, he feels detached. So you go into the room, you are now taking care of a refugee in Lithuania, and you want to start the connection. And the refugee just sits there like this soldier in the mud, and he doesn't make an eye contact. Sometimes he's sitting on a chair, but sometimes he may be even sitting on the ground. He's all in himself, he's all alone, he's all detached. So what we do is we adjust our height to his height, and we try to make an eye contact. And we tell him, hi, I am Eyal. How are you? Can you hear me? And so I'm moving to the see, hear, and if he does not respond to that, I would move to touching him gently on the shoulder, tapping him a little bit, or clutching his hands and asking him, if you hear me, just fetch my hand once or twice, or blink your eyes twice. Okay, so I'll know that you hear me. We work very hard on this communication. If we have some barriers like a chair or like somebody that is sitting with his hands over his eyes, we would gently ask him to remove his hand. And if he does not, we would gently remove his hands, because we would work very hard to start and establish an initial contact. Because if this guy in the mud, he has a connection, then he cannot ignore it, okay? But if he is all detached and all alone, we cannot reach him. After we manage to get this, to establish this initial contact, and with most people, it would take less than half a minute. Okay, I go to him, I say, hi, I'm Eyal. He's not responding. I lower myself to his eye level. I try to catch his eyes. If it does not work, I touch him. That's all it takes, okay? It's really seconds. Once we manage to make an eye contact and to move him from this detachment, we want to emphasize that he is not alone. And we do that by telling him, hey, guy, you're not alone, buddy. I am with you, and I'm going to stay with you. Now, this is extremely important. If you start talking, we always give them positive feedback. Wow, that's great that you talk with me now. I'm very happy that you responded. You are doing well. And if he says something like, I must be dead, I should die, or I did something terrible, or I can't feel anything, we're not arguing with them at that point. Okay, we're not confronting them with anything. We are joining them and letting them be. So we managed to make a contact. Then we emphasized our commitment. Again, as you can see, it does not take long. So far, well, less than 1 minute intervention. Okay, hi, I'm Eyal, I'm with you, that's it. Now we want to move to the more delicate parts. Now, these parts are more delicate because actually what we have is somebody that is overwhelmed by the amygdala area. If you remember the amygdala that we talked about a minute ago, you would probably understand that. Uh, I'm sorry. The amygdala area is overflown. It's the area of memories and feelings all enmeshed together. And when the amygdala is overwhelmed, then the prefrontal area is not working properly. Now, this is important. What happens in the prefrontal area? The prefrontal area is the area of executive functioning. So it's planning, mapping, scanning, starting and stopping, choosing, okay? That's the part. Now, it is a very important part in the brain. And if it's not functioning well, it does not enable us to function and to work on the trauma. So we want all the time to take the load off the amygdala and to move it to the prefrontal area. Okay, so how do we do it? When we go to this person, he's sitting now. I managed to make an eye contact and I managed to introduce myself and to emphasize that I'm with him. Then I would tell him, hey, would you like now for us to drink some water? Now, whatever the question is, it doesn't matter. The questions could be, do you want a phone to call your parents? Or whom do you want us to talk with afterwards? It doesn't matter. What matters is that we start make him work his prefrontal area and leave the overwhelmed amygdala, okay? Because this is choosing, this is moving to planning, okay? Later on in the talk, we would make him choose from two options. Do you want to eat something or drink something? Now, that's a good question. It doesn't matter what he chooses, right? I don't care. I'll bring him cookies or I'll bring him tea. But I want him to choose because choosing is prefrontal. And when the prefrontal is working, the amygdala is less overwhelmed. Okay? This is also the reason. Sorry. And we always enhance the importance of the victim's contribution. So if he drank some water, we can emphasize that. But if he chose, for instance, we can ask him, do you want us to bring water to the other groups of refugees around here? That's a good solution because then we can emphasize his contribution. Now, a contribution to friends or units or buddies or people that came in the same convoy is especially important because people usually suffer from guilt that they didn't function well, and we give them an opportunity to change the memory when it is still consolidating. So they would remember that they functioned. The other thing that does the same and works the prefrontal instead of the amygdala is the cognitive communication. This works also against the emotional overflow. So how do we do that? First of all, we ask for details. Please tell me in full details what you have done, what has happened to you, where were you? This is very important because if we collect all the details and later on we repeat all the details to the victim and he hears that from the outside, he cannot remember, he cannot forget details anymore. So we did something to help him consolidate the memory. The clarity of the picture, remember the clarity of the picture of the memory is very important if you remember the tank slide that I have just shown you. So we ask him to talk about what happened. If he responds in an emotional talking, like for instance, he says to me, hey, look, I'm all shaking. This is terrible. I'm so frightened. I don't want to talk about emotions. I don't want him to talk about emotions. One of the first questions that you usually ask them as therapists is, how do you feel? That's a great conversation question, but it's a terrible acute stress reaction question because it is a target question to the amygdala. We never ask, how do you feel? We would tell him something, hey, you know, shaking is the natural body response to stress. It's a fight or flight position. Now, somebody tells me like that, that sounds a little bit unempathic, but it's not, because it's working to the cognitive areas. And it makes him think, hey, what is fight or flight? I remember that. I learned that in biology, right? This means that and that. Okay, he's right. He's right. Shaking is a part of that. And all of a sudden, I'm not in the emotion area, I'm in the cognition area. If we don't have a good answer, that's okay. Just skip it. Don't contribute to his feelings. So if he says, hey, I'm a loser, or I feel very lousy, I feel very guilty, we are not arguing with them, but we are not also telling them, you know, that's a terrible feeling, which we usually would do, right? That's the empathic response, but we won't do that in acute stress reaction. What we would do instead is, you know, tell me about what happened. Tell me in details. I want to hear the details. Okay, so we're not going into the emotions. We skip the emotions, we neglect the emotions, and we move to the sequencing, which is, of course, a prefrontal function. Okay, and when we repeat the story, so he told me I was there and there, I've done that and that, I couldn't do that, I couldn't save my friend, etc., etc., etc. And I would tell him, you know, and a lot of people would say, for instance, I froze and that's terrible. And I would tell them, you know, what you did is extremely normal in the situation. So I will normalize and I will stick this thing in because it's a very good time to add things to the memory. They're still consolidating them. So we will lower their guilt feeling, or we'll try to lower the guilt feeling, and we will try to help them see that their functioning was the normal one. So they will end up with a good memory or a better memory of themselves in the occasion. The last part of the intervention is to work on the continuity. Now, if the refugee came with a family, we would ask them what is happening with their family and how can they contribute to the family well-being. So we want people to be encouraged from our talk and to be more connected to their teams and their roles and to understand what is happening. So we would try to to help them get a better orientation of what has happened to them, what is happening now, and what is about to happen. And then we will build with them the full story. And while we talk about their story, we, say their story. We will ask them to help us with new details and to focus on the details. And we will help them to maintain the sequence, to keep the cognitive language. And if after we talked about it, they understand it, we would ask them to tell it back to us now. So the story of what happened would be repeated at least 3 times now. Okay? That's the whole story of the SHIELD protocol. So we take people in the early phases of the acute stress reaction, and we make sure that we establish the initial contact. We emphasized our commitment to them. We challenge and control them. We talk in a cognitive communication, and we let them see the continuity in what happened, what is currently happening, and what is going to happen in the near future. If we have any questions so far, and especially about the SHIELD protocol or how to do it, please ask now. Of course, you can get all the slides. I don't need the slides. The slides are used, just use them. I guess Martha would be able to send it to you. Are there any questions?
Can I ask you, Dr. Fruchter, to stop sharing your screen for a moment so I can see if there...
Sure, sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any questions? If you do, please send them to me directly or please write in a common chat.
So what you can recommend for people who are in a basement now, what can help them to keep normal condition, circumstances when they don't have food, electricity, water, and else. Okay, I will touch the SHIELD protocol is good for one-on-one and is good for immediately after a traumatic event. So if something falls down or something bad happens, that's the time for it. If not, I would in a minute talk about the modified debriefing. I would do the modified debriefing with them, Katerina, and I would also do or work on the basic pH with them, which I also will talk in a few minutes. The second question, what can help with nightmares? People and children suffer now about nightmares with bumps and something like this. I would recommend for that to do a long talk with them and ask them to talk about the trauma, okay? To talk about their trauma would help to lower the nightmares. Now, nightmares are not bad because when we sleep and dream, then we evaluate what happened and we process our dreams. So I would even tell these people, always remember you are sleeping with your families here. And when you have the nightmares are good because you need to process what you have been through. And that's the brain's way to process them, okay? Now, this is a terrible situation, of course. You are in a not good conditions and you are in a basement and you are all alone and no electricity, not alone, but with a group, but with no electricity and no food and no water. The most important thing is to bring and to build a stronger social net. If they help each other and they are with each other, that would help them. Okay, how to get rid of obsessive thoughts and scary pictures. You're talking probably, Katharina, about kids, right? For kids, it's very normal to get obsessed in order to cope, because obsessions, OCD symptoms, they are coming from magical thinking. Magical thinking is a normal coping mechanism for the age of 8 to 12. And when we are stressed, sometimes it would go to longer periods. I would probably talk with them and show them that people are with them. And I would also use some behavioral methods, like, for instance, a picture of somebody they like, or even a recording of somebody they would love, or to stay very close to their parents and not to develop avoidance. This is extremely important. The way to work against avoidance, if we have a group of people that are suffering from that, is a participating model, to go with them and see that nothing wrong, nothing bad happens when you do things. So if I believe that if I would drink in my left hand, something bad would happen, I would practice with them to drink with their left hand, and to see that 40 minutes later nothing happened. The anxiety would rise, then it would stabilize, and then it would start going down.
Помочь людям, которые чувствуют себя виноватыми, те, которые переехали за рубеж, ну, спасая своих детей.
Поняла. How we could help people who feel guilty because they run away abroad for save their children?
Yes. Okay. That's a great question. We're talking about not exactly the trauma, but the moral trauma here, because people, you know, they just ran away and they feel guilty because they left their country. And I think it is very relatively easy to work with them. But first of all, remember that if it is after a traumatic event, and they say, hey, we are guilty and that's our punishment, etc., we are not talking with them on guilt feelings, because we are not working on feelings, we are working only on cognition. But usually we can normalize that and say, hey, every person that has kids, or every woman that has kids, the first care should be the kids. And the country would, even for the country, it is better that you fled, because they don't have enough food, they don't have enough places to hide. And if you were wounded or your kids would be dead, that would be worse for the country than if you stayed. So for now, it is not very easy, but it is the right and the normal thing to do. So we actually build a new logic, or we get a new approach. That's a cognitive work, right? We're not taking their words and, you know, accepting it as a whole. We can understand it, but we can show them a totally different angle, right? If we don't have the bread now, we would love the bread to go to the guys that fight, and not to the kids that might just be harmed and they cannot add anything to the fight. Yes, sure.
Я просто пам'ятаю, як моя бабуся розказувала, скільки сімей розпадалось під час от війни. Дуже багато сімей, вони не могли переносити весь той спектр страждань.
I just remember how my grandma told how many families has separated, divorced, because of bad relationship between them, and it was very hard, difficult to bear all that suffering, wide spectrum of suffering.
І моє запитання наступне: чи з вашого досвіду є такий факт, що робити, чи є це щось, ну, таке звичайне в цій ситуації, що всі сім'ї розпадаються, чи якось допомагати? От як бути в таких ситуаціях нам, фахівцям? Що робити нам?
Basing on your experience, what do you think, what shall we do in such situation? Are every family separated, divorced in such situation or not? What shall we tell them? How to prevent,
Yes.
maybe?
Yes, I usually consult people not to take hard decisions during urgent times. I would usually advise people to wait and to say, okay, the relationship now is not good, but we will wait 4 months, 6 months before we make any decision. Because to decide when everybody is very tensed and the future is not clear and the whole situation is not clear is not good. It's the same when people are coming to me and asking me when they are in depression, they have major depression. I tell them, you don't take any ideas or any solutions or any actions during cognitive depression thinking, because you can't cope with anything. So I would advise them and try to normalize that everybody in stress usually would feel less good. You know, there is no sexual desire, there is no desire to do good things together because everybody is very into themselves and everything has been changed because I'm a refugee now. But this is not the time to take decisions. Decisions should be avoided if possible. Of course, if there is violence at the home or anything, that's not good. But if people can cope and stay together, it is much advised at that time. Okay. I was also asked a question about the 15-year-old by Renata, a 15-year-old who came to Lithuania. And he didn't see anything hard, but he is trying to avoid seeing anything about the news and not to hear about the war. We would not make him cope, or it's not good to make him cope. Sometimes avoidance is a good method. Okay, usually if he functions well and he manages well, we would not push him. We would just remind him that he may come and talk with us whenever he needs. So if the need would come, he would know he has an address. And it is recommended to invite him every week or so, just to remind him that. To say, hey, how are you? How are you functioning? What are you doing? If you need me, I'm here, that's all. Okay, that would be what I would have done with him. I would be very happy if there is any one more
Thank you so
question and then
much.
to move on.
Uh,
Yes, Natalka.
Можна, я запитаю. Як допомогти, як підтримати бесіду з людьми, які втратили дитину, якщо дитина впала на окупованій території на вертольоті, і невідомо точно, було перше повідомлення, що загинула дитина, але потім, військовий, молодий військовий, а потім все ж таки, що, можливо, це неправильна ще інформація. Як правильно підтримувати в такій ситуації батьків?
Таня, я тебе перекладаю. Привіт. How to support parents of children who has death maybe, but it's not sure, fall down from helicopter, but they don't know eventually is lost their children or not. How to support them?
You know, that is the toughest question in the book, because not to know is something that is almost people cannot cope with. Okay, it's something that nobody can cope with. That I don't know if I lost my kid or not. That's a terrible time, and I guess the only thing we can do at that point is to be very empathic. I don't know. I don't have any method for that situation. It's a terrible situation. I would just let them talk and cry the feelings. And I would emphasize one thing, though, and that's the need to continue living and building things and making things, to continue that in order to make sure that if he comes back or if things settle down, they would be able to accept him. okay? So I would be very empathic and tell them that he would love them to keep on going and to try and build themselves. And since they cannot do anything else in order to understand now, we just have to take a deep breath and wait. You know, it's something like, I don't know, if I had, for instance, I had a bad a physical checkup and I might have a cancer, and I'm now waiting for an MRI for a month, right? I don't know if I have cancer. I have to wait. That's a time, you know, that you have just to wait. So people should be very empathic, and I should continue doing what I do. If it helps them, and sometimes it does, I would suggest praying. I would suggest doing something good for the community, because when you are busy, you're thinking less. But I don't have any good other methodology in that situation. It's a terrible situation.
Dr. Fruchter, we have few more
Thank
questions.
you.
So I have a question for you. Would you like to continue with your lecture
Yes,
now?
I think it would be best that I continue, and maybe Marta is not here now, but maybe those who have further questions would send them to Marta, and she would send them to me, and we will answer them one by one. Okay, no answer would be left alone. Okay.
I will put the email right here in the comment section.
Okay, that'll be great. So I'm resharing myself. Okay, so now the modified debriefing is an important method, and I wanted you to hear about that. We usually have groups. For instance, in the basement question, we have a group of people that are sitting there. Maybe they know each other. Some of them would, some of them won't. They are suffering from different things. And it is extremely important for them to move and talk, to be able to talk about what they are going through in order to make sure that they are not alone. Now, I was in the Philippines after the nature disaster of the typhoon as part of the Israeli IDF field hospital, humanitarian field hospital that was sent to the Philippines. And most of my work there was to do modified debriefing groups. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with debriefing as a concept, but what we used to do before the 90s was 3 circles of talking. One is to talk about all the details of the event. The second was to talk about emotions, and everybody was forced to talk about their emotions. And the third one was to collect everything and to look to the future optimistically. Now, this sounds very good, but it worked terrible. And what it showed is that some of the people that are more used to avoiding and to manage their emotions without talking about them. When we forced them to talk about them, they broke, and all their defenses were broken, and they developed PTSD. So it was said to stop the debriefing, but actually after we developed the shield, we developed also a modified debriefing way in order to enable people to debrief and still not be harmed by it. So this is how it looked when I've done it. Usually it was in circles, but sometimes the circumstances didn't enable us to do it. Of course, when you are in the basement, it's best to do when people have something to drink or to eat, and when you have the lights on. But if that's not possible, and I understand, of course, that that's not possible, then we do it in the dark and we talk together. But it is still very important to collect all the people and to talk to them and to say something like, everybody is suffering now. Everybody thinks that they are alone in their suffer, but it's not like that. And it would be best for us to talk about what has happened. Now, this is true for a refugee group in Lithuania and in the basement in Kiev. It doesn't matter. It is right because we want to create a social net of help. And we do that. First of all, I would ask everybody to talk about what happened to them and how they ended up in the basement, or how they ended up as refugees. So to talk about what happened to them. Now, this might take a while because people, you know, they tend to tell all sorts of details, but it is very important for people to understand that they all went through the same things, more or less. They all suffered from terrible sights or terrible circumstances. They all left their dear ones and their, of course, their houses and their family pictures and everything that they loved. They left it behind. They don't know what would happen to them, and they don't know if they would leave the crisis. So to ask them on the first circle to say, now we will do a talk, we will do it in 3 circles. The first circle, everybody would share what happened to them and how they ended up here. And then the first one would start talking and the second, and all of a sudden they would understand that they are not alone. Everybody is suffering from the same things. The second circle, I would say after everybody talked and I would sum it up, I would probably say something like, okay, it is extremely important for everybody to understand the different angles of what happened and how everybody ended up here. And now I would like to hear from each and everybody here, every one of you, what you are going to do on the first day after we are here, okay? Or after we finish with the refugee camp, or after we are out of the basement. But what I look for is the near future. And I am looking for activity in the near future. These two things are very important because we want to tell them we have a past, we have a present, and we have a future. So everything is connected. There is a continuity. It's not something that is, you know, cut in the middle. Our life is cut, but it's not. We have a continuity because we still live. Okay, so I would ask everyone to tell me that. And sometimes it would connect other people in the room, but sometimes not, but I don't care. And I'm looking for active things. So I would go out and go to church and pray, that's good. I would go out and go to eat and make some food for everybody, that's great. I'm going to tomorrow to sit down and wait for all my friends to be collected, that's terrible because that's passive, okay? I am going to look for my friends, that's active. So I'm looking for future and active, okay? The third circle would be me collecting what is said into a community. So I would ask or talk with them about how things connect, how everybody has been under the same things, and we all have been under the same threats, and we might still be under the same threats. I would emphasize the commitment to the future and the continuity in the future. And I would talk about a little bit about how they can help in the present and start do the active things that they dream of. They can start doing it here when we are in the present. So I would try and move them, if they're stuck, to move them also to a continuity of active actions. Okay, now the event of talking and being able to talk, you know, I don't know if you know the Philippine people, but the Philippines, they don't talk about emotions. They are usually just smiling and not saying anything. And all of a sudden, without me emphasizing anything, when they started talking, they started, of course, crying, or they started talking about things they've been through. Some people just came in and hugged each other, and some of them even started singing hymns of glory to the Lord. But they have supported each other, and when we ended up, it looked totally different than when we started, when you look at the people. So this is very important to remember. And I truly encourage you to try that because it does work. Okay? I will repeat what I said about the modified debriefing. I tell them at the beginning, we are going to have 3 circles of talk. The first 2 will be mainly you. The last one will be mainly me. The first circle would be everybody would share what happened to them since the war started until you ended up in the basement or in the refugee camp or wherever. The second is what are we going to actively do in the 24 hours after things happened, after things ended, after we were released from the basement, after we were released from the refugee camp, or we stopped being refugees, what are we going to do? And the third is summing that up and trying to move that also into the present. That's modified debriefing. It is a very useful method, and it would enable each and every one of you to work with groups instead of persons. Now, we do not necessarily need the whole story to be the same. It doesn't matter. The experience is the same. That's what matters. Now, we must all the time remember the continuity method. A model, as I said, it was built by Lazarus, and he was talking about basic PH, that's initials, of keeping the coping methods intact. And the basic PH initials are actually talking about 6 different fields of coping that might help each and every one of the people that you will be working with. One is the belief. If I believe in God, that's a good coping. If I believe in mankind, that's good coping. Okay? I would ask people, what do you believe in? And I will see if they can make a continuum in their belief. If I'm an optimistic person to start with, and that's my belief, I would encourage me to keep on being optimistic because, hey, I was saved. I'm now in a safe place, or I might get help, but I can keep it up. If I am able to keep it up, I might dissolve my risk for PTSD. Again, the second coping method is the affect. If I'm usually used to be happy or to keep on good mood, then I would try and emphasize the way to keep on the good mood, okay? Now, it is very hard if I don't know where my kid is, but still, it is important to be encouraged to keep the good mood. And I will tell somebody, for instance, if a couple comes to me and they don't know what about their kid, I would tell the mother, hey, usually you're keeping the good mood, right? It is very important for your husband that you keep this good mood, or for your other kids that you keep this good mood, because the continuity is very important. And I can tell you it will help her too, because that's how it works. The social net is the other coping method that we should keep intact. And of course, imagination. There are a lot of people that use imagination. I imagine what I would eat. I imagine what I would do. I imagine with what I would play. These are all very good and useful tools. Don't break them up. Encourage the victim to keep it up if it works for them. Some people, they don't use beliefs and they don't use imagination. They are very cognitive, wise person. Okay, and if I talk with somebody who is always on the cognitive aspect, I would encourage him to keep on judging everything with cognition. For instance, you know, when you say that, I understand that you say actually that and that, and this is a good way to talk with them. We would work very hard to keep on his basic method, his coping method, to keep it going, even when cognition sometimes feel broken on the hazards of war or hazards of being a refugee. And the last thing is to keep on the physiology. So if I need to eat and I have food, it's good to eat. But sometimes, you know, for a lot of people to practice to do some running or jogging or walking or doing something helps. And if that's what helped them, we would encourage that. So at that point, we would encourage everything as we did before. So we will make a continuum between what happened, what we used to be, where we used to be, to the present and to the future. Okay, this continuum again is extremely important. That's the whole basic PH method, and that's very good for the first few days after a change, after every change. And every change is a trauma in its way. Okay? The last part of this talk, and it would take no more than 5 minutes because I know we have exceeded our time, is how to take care of us. You can see here different pictures of people taking care of other people after some a catastrophic calamity happened. And it is very important for us to understand that when we are in direct exposure to trauma, because we talk about traumas that people went through and we suffer that through their eyes, we may pay the cost. Okay, now that's true in emergency rooms, but that's true everywhere. And that would cause us burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious traumatization, soul sadness, secondary traumatization. You might have heard any one of these phrases. They all say the same, okay? They all say that we have been traumatized and now we pay the cost. Now, compassion fatigue is a range of behaviors and feelings stemming from the wish to help, and we all here have a wish to help these victims, but it will make us suffer from post-trauma at the end. So we must take care of ourselves, okay? Usually, and we must take care of ourselves because, you know, even after a long time, the stone would fall from water. So if we hear a story and we hear another story and we hear another story and all the stories are terrible, we would gradually have the corrosion and it will take its toll. And the signs and symptoms of that would be that we would have lower energy and efficacy, sadness, sometimes intrusive withdrawal, apathy response, and sometimes we would use sarcastic humor instead of empathy. And these people do deserve empathy because they're in a terrible state. We would be more forgetfulness, we would be more forgetful, we would be less concentrated, and we will have lower compassion for others. So we will use more negative stereotypes, okay? What do we do for that? First, we need to use our ABC for compassion fatigue. Be aware, keep balance, and keep connected, okay? Awareness means that we must be aware that sometimes we want to help, but we cannot always help. And even if we want to work now 60 hours in a row and not to sleep and not to eat because there are so many people that need us, we should give ourselves some sleep and we should give ourselves some food and we should give ourselves some recess, you know, some good things to feel our balancing scales. So if I need to go home and hug my kid, that's good because it will build my resiliency to the future. Okay. Second, we need to keep balance. So we need to keep some of the things that will feel us, to take short breaks, to change the mission sometime, to look at even, you know, to stop and look at what my football team has done, just to take a breath to ourselves, to go and hug my husband or my wife or my kids, take things that build me up. So if it is important for me to go jogging in the morning, even if I have another refugee that I could take care of, I would keep on running in the mornings because I need to keep myself well balanced so I can give this empathy to the next one that comes in the door. And the C is, of course, connection, okay? To keep our social net. And if I use my friends, I can call them or my wife or my kids in order to make sure that I have somebody that supports me in order to support them, okay? And if I need a professional help, then I can also go to professional help, but not to keep it to myself and just say, hey, it will fade out, because it seldom does not fade out. That's what I had to say. So I will stop the sharing. And if we have one more question, I might take. And if not, yeah, it is kind of a cool down meeting. But it is not just a cool down meeting, Florian. It is also a method to build unity in the group, the modified debriefing. Okay, and the group is the most important thing in coping with traumas. Yes, so one more question, and of course, then we'll end this session and I will answer all questions that would come through the mail.
So maybe we'll go to Mrs. Agnes Apoliena, who asked a question in chat. So your doctor also can see it. The question is, Ms. Agnes, do you want to ask it yourself? If not, I will be happy to read it. Is propanol working on traumatic memory shortly after traumatic event?
No. Propranolol is a beta blocker. Beta blocker works on the anxiety. Okay, it will lower the heart rhythm. It would lower the breathing. It would lower the tremor if we have. So it will come down physiologically. Now, to come down physiologically is good, but it does not work on the memory. Okay, the memory should be consolidated differently, and that should be done by talking. Okay, so medication would enable us talk about it maybe, but and propranolol does not jeopardize with the memory consolidation, so it's not bad to use, but it's not changing the memory.
So thank you, Doctor. We will conclude our meeting for today. Thank you so much for this very comprehensive, very informative lecture. Thank you to all of the participants for coming here and being with us. Please take note of the email address that is here on the chat section. And as Dr. Fruchter has promised, he will answer all your questions in a later term. Thank you so much.
And I thank you for the chance to work with you, because it is extremely important to give for our experience and to make sure that you'll do the best you can, because hey, I would love to be there and work with you, but since my Russian and Ukrainian is terrible, but it's not existent, I can work on it from here. So good luck. Really, we are with you.
Thank you again on behalf of Marta and all of us at ELNET, and I hope we will be able to work with you again. Thank you.